Derik Queen is an offensive big. Khaman Maluach is a defensive big. We get curious about prospects just so we can put them in boxes. Why?
You are Locked On Raptors, your daily Toronto Raptors podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
It's your favorite part of the day. Thanks for joining and making Locked On Raptors your first listen every day. On this Monday, June the 16th, Sean officially begins his time away, so I'm stepping in. I'm Vivek Jacob. I've been covering the Toronto Raptors for 8 seasons across several outlets. You can follow it all on X, Instagram, and YouTube, and be sure to check out the Locked On Raptors Discord, where we can talk all things basketball, but especially the Raptors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Be sure to check it out. But for now, let's get this party started. Joining me for today's episode is a familiar face that I needed around to ease the tension of hosting duties. It is the lovely, supremely talented Katie Heindel. She's got her Substack at Basketball Feelings and soon to be book, so keep your eyes peeled. Katie, how are you?
I'm good, man. This is fun. I feel like we've taken over, like we've booted Sean and just called a mutiny and taken over the ship. That's not at all what happened, just for everyone listening to know. Yeah.
Yeah, but we'll see how long this thing can last. So, Katie, today's theme is inspired by you, and it is leading with curiosity when it comes to young players. We're all getting set for the draft here, and what we as a collective love to do is get extremely curious about who these prospects are, but then just as quickly put them in boxes. Even beyond prospects, I think of someone like Ochai Agbaji as like a prime example of what we're going to talk about. Played a couple of seasons in Utah. Everyone's down about the Pascal trade, so it's like they're subconsciously just wanting to hate on everything. He comes over, he struggles after the trade, and we're going into that offseason, and a lot of people are like, oh, this guy is not an NBA player, he's not going to fit, all of that. And then he comes into the season, is nearly 50% from the field, just under 40% from three, looks a very serviceable role player. How is that possible, Katie?
Time and growth and development and patience, like all the bad words of basketball that we don't really like to talk about a lot, especially when it comes to either prospects and young players, draftees, as you mentioned, or if it comes to even trades. I feel like this can also happen with like journeyman kind of role player trades too, right? Like that is sort of the definition of a role player. You play one role. And even I think that is sort of falling away because we've seen not just like the importance of role players, of course, in the NBA finals that we're watching now. And I would say the NBA finals of the past 5 years. I mean, I'll go all the way back to the Raptors, right? Like they're very essential. And we're seeing role players take on new skills as well. So, even a role player is no longer one dimensional. So it's kind of weird to me that this need to flatten athletes has so stubbornly stuck around. I think for Ochai, how did it happen? It's just like his tenacity and the work that the team has done with him. And I think his recognition of where his skill sets are best fitted. And I think confidence, watching him at summer leagues past and just seeing that his talent slowly come to the surface and seeing what the direction that the team chose for him this year, obviously, or for themselves rather, and where he fit into that obviously helps. But yeah, overall, I think it's a habit I hate. I know hate is a strong word, but I will say that it is a habit I really hate of ourselves, of the quote NBA media and fans as well. I think that, which I know we'll get into it, but I think I'll say the impetus I think it comes from a generally good and excited place, but it can sort of yield one-dimensional, if not sometimes toxic results.
Yeah, and speaking of the good, obviously everyone was kind of priming themselves to put themselves in the best position to get the number one pick at this draft, and everyone's so excited about Cooper Flag. And generally, there's been a lot of good things said about at least the top 4 picks and wanting to get into that range. But then once you are out of that and the Raptors are picking 9th, you start to look at these other prospects and you get very curious. And you're like, hey, what can this player do? What can this player? How can this player fit into this Raptors team? And that's where we also get into like, okay, the Raptors have a clear need at center. You've got Jakob Poeltl as the starting center, but at this point, you've either got Scotty Barnes playing some center minutes, or you've got Jonathan Mobo coming in as a backup, and that's where I think a lot of fans would like to see a center come in. Some fans obviously just want the best player available, and so that also makes for some fun debates. And I think one thing that I found interesting is Maluach is someone who projects to be a very good big, but because he also comes with this tag of maybe being a bit raw, and the Raptors kind of going into next season with these big goals of, wanting to make the playoffs, there are people who say, well, it's going to take too long for him. And again, that's kind of a box where, yeah, okay, there is some offensive polish that's lacking, but there's also enough to see that, the way he finishes inside, there is opportunity for growth, and we don't know how quickly that growth will come. Someone in the NBA Finals who we saw with the Raptors for quite some time, Pascal Siakam, kind of altered everything we know about, development and trajectory. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one, it's so funny to me to say, like, don't pick so-and-so because they're too raw and they're not going to be ready in one season, when it's like, no one is. Like, even Cooper Flag, like, Wembanyama had a great season this year. I'd say in his rookie season, like, yeah, people love to come out and watch him because of the spectacle of Wembanyama and just like the fact that he plays such a different style of basketball. But like, he was still a rookie. Like, he's still very green. And I would say even now, Cooper Flag will be the same way, despite, him being such a touted prospect and this sort of generational player. Anyone you're looking at to pick up in the draft, even if they are a little older and have like done more years of college than their counterparts, are going to look raw and out of their depth, because they are. Like, you can't college basketball to NBA basketball, it's such a different field. The game is played in such a different way. You're playing with obviously a lot more physicality. You're playing with, in most cases, professional athletes who've been in that league for 5 and up years, if they've made it that long, right? So it's tough. It's a huge change. So I will get that like pet peeve out of the way first. And I think with the Raptors, it's kind of interesting. I think there's a little bit of a duality, because they've really prided themselves on being this team that can take non-linear prospects. And by that, I mean players who aren't just one-dimensional, right? It's like, yeah, they're really big and they could play a traditional center, but we want them to play a stretch position. We want them to be able to switch between either 4 and 5, or even like 3 through 5. Like, that's something that the Raptors have really, I can't believe I'm forgetting the name that we gave it, like just 2 seasons ago. What was the nickname of this like style of play?
Vision 6-9.
Yeah. Vision 6. See how quickly like it went out of my head. But like, that is such a prime example of the fact of like the Raptors and Masai, and the way that they looked at their development is they wanted to be quite fluid. So that makes it even trickier to get someone to be like, you just need to have one skill and play one position, because that's not the way that the Raptors looked at development for such a long time. So I think that kind of flies in the face of what we're saying. And I still think that is sort of how they look at scouting and drafting, just from my understanding and conversations with the team, and like who could best fit. They want complementary fits, of course. And I think they know there's like a lack at the center position, but that they're not going to go out and just like grab a true center in the draft, because I think they are still a team that loves to keep their options open.
Yeah. And, I do think that one way that Vision 6-9 evolved in terms of how they're bringing players in now, I think, they were so heavy on bringing in like these excellent athletes and believing so much in their development process that they could bring the other aspects along. And maybe because of that failed experiment, now when I look at Jacoby Walter or Jonathan Mobo or Jamal Shed, I feel like there's a more natural feel for the game that we're seeing from these players. And I think that's where they've maybe gone back to saying, hey, let's get the basketball player first and the athleticism can come second.
No, I think
noticed as well.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think you're right about that, because I think like they've done so well with like quite raw talents, right? And they've shown what they can do. But again, like that's through patience. Like Pascal Siakam, who you mentioned earlier, is a perfect example, because I would say, lamentably, as Raptors fans, we're watching him now play some of the best basketball. I think the best basketball of his career, right? But look how long that took, and like going through 2 different systems, being asked to really hone and change and adapt his game. But some of that, you can see some of the groundwork that was set through like first the G League run that he had, and then of course the championship run that he had in Toronto. Like I look at his defensive capabilities now and I'm like, where was that in Toronto, Pascal? Like really like
let it go a little bit though, that last year and a half.
Yeah, true. There were some other things afoot. But something like that, like that's just time and a feel and situations like that. That's not really anything, unfortunately, you can force in the NBA. So again, I think sometimes you don't see these new qualities sort of flourish until there's an entire system change, right? I'm not to already like talk ourselves out of the draft this year, but just to put more context around it. I do think whoever is drafted, and I said this on the last podcast, I do like the Raptors drafting in that range a little bit more. I feel like there's more fluidity, as we mentioned earlier, in their scouting. There's like also a lot of these athletes are phenomenal, like the people who will still be quote available at that time. Like it's not like talent is falling off a cliff. But I think in that range, like 9 to even like mid-teens, like early 20s, it's where you've got Pascal, it's where you've got OG. Like there's a comfort there. So I think they'll be fine in that space. And I think the team has just so much more of a sense of self and like what they are and how they want to play than I'd say even when Scotty Barnes arrived, when everything's started to feel like it was up in the air, right? So whoever is drafted is coming into a team that already understands like what they're going to need from that person and hopefully how they're going to slot into the team.
Yeah, no, I think that builds perfectly into what we're going to get into next and what we learned about the young Raptors over the past season. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money isn't just a budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you stop just managing your money and start building your wealth. How does that sound, Katie?
That sounds good. It sounds great.
When I started using Monarch, I realized just how much I was spending on food delivery. Now I budget smarter and save more. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNBA for half off your first year. And we're back at it here. And we're going to get into what we were curious about the young Raptors last year and what we actually learned about them. So maybe let's start off with Grady Dick. And I think, that rookie season, we saw him go through some struggles, sort of kind of have to adapt to the NBA level, especially on the defensive side of the ball. We saw him be very effective at corner threes. And what did you maybe see in that first season that maybe has helped him be where he is now after the second?
Yeah, I think in the first season, I saw a lot of tenacity from him. I saw that kind of like Chris Boucher like ability to be able to pop up sort of from everywhere when the team really needed like some either like an influx of energy or sort of a destabilizer. You could see the shot, like it was coming along, certainly. And you could definitely see the confidence. And at times the confidence had sort of like inverted and imploded a little bit because the timing wasn't there yet. So you could see all these flashes. I understood what the team saw in him when they drafted him. I will say that him adding stability to that, also just like adding a lot more physical size and conditioning was what I noticed the most going into the second year, especially seeing him at Summer League and playing. I remember watching the first Raptors game of last Summer League in the row with like all Toronto media and everyone being like, do you see how big Grady is? Like Grady's huge, which was like our first dumb collective realization. But obviously he put that to use, I think, in the ability this year. I think that's affected like, obviously spacing, shot making, the way that he can kind of create for himself and get to places, which again was there in his game, but I don't think he quite had the tools to really release it. So that's like, to go back to what we were talking about earlier, that's something that could not have happened without time. You can't rush development like that, considering the fact that like he was still basically a kid when he got to the team, right? And the level of maturation that has to come, I think, playing through one season in the NBA and then physical maturation, decision making, all of that kind of thing. And that's, I think, is only going to get better, because I think what we saw at the end of this season was just Grady's patience, Grady being very confident to the point where sometimes he's got, he can look cold. Like he can be like a cool sort of customer. We're not talking SGA levels, but like he can be up there, and I really I think that's like something that the team needs quite a lot. So yeah, I think again, like you could see the flashes and flourishes, but I will stress that it took time for him to be able to get where he is.
Yeah, no, definitely. And, I think one aspect of the development that was really cool to see this season was that early stretch where he was tasked with so much because of the injuries. And it was like him and RJ Barrett having to carry the offense. And all of a sudden we're seeing Grady just like get to his spots time and time again and be really effective as a scorer. Obviously, I think that took a toll on him as the season went on. And I think that fatigue kicked into the percentages that we saw, and maybe some of the struggles shooting the ball, and maybe not being as efficient as we would have liked. But I think overall, like, there's a lot that he'll take from this season going into next year. Another couple players, maybe we can talk about them both. Jamal Shed, obviously, the opportunities really opened up once the Davion Mitchell trade happened. And then Jacoby Walter has the injury early, and we're kind of waiting to see him. And I'd say both players in that second half of the season really, showed their appeal, really showed that they could be meaningful contributors next season.
Yeah, and I think like the Shed, I don't know. I feel like there's a line where we have to like not make comparisons to Raptors of yore, but it's really hard not to, especially when you see so much of Fred VanVleet and someone like Jamal Shed, and Kyle, like flashes of Kyle Lowry too. That might be my own personal preference for like my favorite style of point guard, certainly like a floor general. But I think he kind of had an alternate route a little bit, right? Like, to the league and to the pros. So I think that's really served him. That sort of forces a kind of maturation that you wouldn't necessarily see with a top prospect, right? And I think there's a sense of really fighting to keep your spot, and to keep your relevancy in a team. And he did that, and he really showed that. I think like his sort of firecracker attributes, where again, sometimes he could get a little bit ahead of himself. He seems to be a lot more grounded, in his first sort of, certainly in this season, than I actually anticipated. I thought like him kind of I don't want to say carrying. I don't mean carrying the team in the way that we would say it of like a superstar, but I mean it in maybe more of like an anchoring quality. I think that he had in especially in some of the Raptors' big wins this season. You know, I think a lot of that came from him and his ability to sort of direct the flow of the floor at any given moment. So that was really impressive to me, because a lot of that, you know, again, you don't really see until especially with guards, you know, like until they're into like maybe their third, fourth, or fifth seasons. So him, like, he's just been, I don't know, he's like so much fun to watch for me. And I'm excited to see how he fits into this roster. And I hope he does play a big part in the team this season.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, just his energy, his tenacity, I think those are the biggest things that he brings to the table. And like, you know, similar to Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet, not going to let their size get in the way of, you know, how hard they compete. And I think that's something that just always, you know, wins the hearts of fans watching. Looking at Jacoby, I think he's someone who is, you know, really competitive, but I think his instincts are excellent so far. Like, for a rookie, I thought he was amazing, and, you know, sort of making reads, and on the offensive end, making cuts at the right time, you know, pulling up for his mid-range jumper when it was there. And I think he's someone that really intrigues me as a potential long-term starter for the Raptors.
Yeah, and I think like something I don't want to forget to mention, but feels really relevant to this, especially I think for someone like Shed and Jacoby, is the fact that, you know, playing on such a young team, and a team that kind of had, I mean, I know, you know, every year the expectation is like, we want to win again in Toronto, like the line that we hear every media day. However,
we don't just want to, we will.
Sorry, yeah, my bad, Masai. We will win again in Toronto. We all understood that was not going to be this season, but I think there is something to be said for when that pressure is kind of off. Like it wasn't that the team was directionless, but when you have all these young prospects playing with all these other young prospects, and, you know, like the most senior person on the team is Garrett, and like he's not playing a ton, and then Scotty is maybe looked to as the leader, and he can relate, of course, like a lot more to these young guys. There's a lot more fluidity, and I think freedom to make mistakes, which you don't necessarily have when you're like a top prospect going into a team that's like, we need to win now. Like, this is our timeline, and here's how you fit into it. There's not a lot of room for mistakes, and there probably aren't a lot of minutes. And I think these guys have all really flourished because there've been so many minutes to go around, and like very good minutes, not just garbage time situations. So that's, I think, how they've been able to really hone their skill. And I think credit to Darko, because he does see that and understand how to bring that out of them. But yeah, that's just like something I've thought about more as we've been chatting, of like, this also only gets to be this way for these guys because they're on a team where like everybody is figuring it out, right? Like, everybody is young, everybody is figuring it out. Everybody is being really trusted.
Yeah. And as we get into our next topic of discussion, and, you know, the level of trust and the level of expectation, I think that's going to be a fun one. And we'll get into Jonathan Mobo as well. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Is Benedict Mathurin going to pop off for 27 like he did in Game 3, or melt under the pressure like he did in Game 4? Are you new to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, Katie, as we get set to wrap up here, looking at expectations for the young core moving forward. And I think let's start with Jonathan Mobo. We didn't talk about him in the second segment, but he's someone who got probably more opportunity than we anticipated at the start. And then, we see some of the flashes of the playmaking. We see with him some of the rawness in the finishing and that being a weakness. But defensively, I think is where he probably stood out more than anything, being able to defend multiple positions, taking on wings, taking on guards at times, guarding the 5-man. And that is probably the most exciting aspect that he brings to this team.
I think so. And because it's like another use for that like phenomenal reach that he has, right? And it's like really shows a knack and growth in his sense of timing, is what, good defense really requires. And that's something that I think is tougher with younger players because of the lack of patience and experience, right? Wanting to kind of rush everything, not necessarily wanting to control the pace of the game. I will say that's really important for the Raptors, and how like a good way that you can, exemplify like defense feeding into offense, because when you can kind of control the possessions like that, and whether you're picking up second chance points, whether you're grabbing rebounds, whether you're like slowing down your opponent and making them play at the pace that you want, more time and control is something that this Raptors team going into this season, I think could really, really use and would benefit them immensely. So if you have someone like Mobo who can chip away at that and honestly sometimes have a real direct hand in controlling the pace and trajectory of a game, I think that's going to really work well for some of the more explosive prospects we've chatted about so far. And defense, frankly, is something that was just like painful, sometimes painful to watch this past season, right? Like we understood quite quickly, I think, that the days of like defense is our main identity as a team were out the window. So it's good to have some of that back.
No question. In terms of areas of improvement for Mobo next season, is it primarily like that finishing around the basket for you? Like that's something, I think it was nice that he was able to pop a couple of threes. But I do feel that that's more of like a long-term goal. I think especially with the way the Raptors are going to be playing next season and, the potential need for center minutes and whatnot. I think that aspect, the finishing around the basket, just being more clean with it, being stronger with it, is probably the biggest thing that I'm looking to see next season.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Like stronger and intentional. I think of like Pascal and like the early parts of his career where one of the most frustrating things to watch was just him not finishing like around the rim and like driving, but then like halfway through deciding and kind of falling out or maybe looking for the call, which again is like, it's not a great habit for a young team to get into because you're not going to get the calls. And also playing through contact, like Mobo can do that. Like he certainly has the size, maybe not the strength if we're talking about like him going up against a Giannis type, like a giant type, but like, I think otherwise he can pretty much like get himself through traffic and get himself to the rim. And that's something where, again, like that does, I think, fit in the style that the Raptors have shown themselves to want to win games with, this sort of like chip away, kind of like chip away the lead mentality. And it works because, the Pacers, I will point out, play that kind of basketball and they are doing it right now. So I think there's a lot of room for that. And I think something like that would also really complement someone of Mobo's skills, and it wouldn't really put him out of his depth. Like, I'm glad you mentioned the threes because of course, like that is the flashy thing that everybody wants to see. But if it doesn't come naturally and like those, if you're going to lose those looks, because they're forced shots or they're rush shots, I'd rather he be somebody who concentrates on, like getting to the rim, finishing there, getting really comfortable in like close proximity basketball.
What are you most curious to see with Jacoby Walter next season?
That's a good question. I think like, not to cop out, but like a lot of the same things that we've been mentioning with, everybody else. I think he has like a real good knack for timing, I think already, and sort of reading the floor, sometimes in like a preternatural way that is surprising for someone of his age. So I think more of that, because you don't really need for him to be explosive. You don't really need for him to dictate space. That's something that I think we've talked through a lot of these other guys like that's something that fits more within their skill set. So maybe more of the same of like slowing the game down a little bit, reading the game, reading the ball. I think those are things that I at least was impressed with the games that I caught him in, the games that I was there in person to catch him in this season. What about you?
I think for me, it'll be on the defensive end, because I do think offensively, we've had this season where the young guys got a lot of opportunity. And so you had these moments where you could go one-on-one or you could try stuff. And I think there's going to be a lot less of that next season. And so I think offensively, it's going to be about, hey, can you just fill a role? Can you take the open three when it comes to you? Can you cut to the basket? And I trust him to do those things. I think defensively, the next step up for me is he made a lot of understandable mistakes for a rookie where, he's buying, the pump fake, where, he's a little overzealous in terms of going for a steal and commits a foul. And, that's the type of stuff where I'm trying to see, hey, how much does that improve next season?
Those are good. Yeah, I feel like there was a couple of those awkward where it's like, the flyby defensive leaps where it's like, oh, you really bid on that like 5 seconds too soon. Yeah. And then now you're jumping out of bounds. Yeah.
Yeah. Jamal Shed, I think I will go with the big flashy thing. I think it has to be the 3-point shooting. You mentioned Kyle Lowry, you mentioned Fred VanVleet. Like the big thing with them is they had the 3-point shot. And Shed, post All-Star, he only shot 28% from 3. And so I think that's something coming into next season. It's probably sounds like a lofty goal, but is there a way that he can get to, closer to 35% and just be kind of respectable? I mean, that still be, for today's standards, kind of, just in and around league average. And that's a big jump to ask. But yeah, that's, I think, a huge X factor with him.
Yeah. I am really curious to see just like what another summer of conditioning is going to do for these guys, because something that like I noticed like we've kind of consistently said all throughout this was just like how a lot of the numbers and percentages tapered off towards the end of the season, certainly post All-Star. And I think that just speaks to, for a lot of them, playing through their first full season where they were the number one options. They weren't just like coming off the bench to fill minutes, right? And that is hard, and it does really show, towards the end of the season and March and April, and I think that's why we saw some of those numbers take a dive. So I am curious to see how another summer, like getting through that, and then how another summer getting ready sort of prepares them for that.
Well, I think the perfect man to finish off that thought with is Grady Dick, because you saw again huge role at the start of the season, and then that kind of weighs him down as we go into the second half of the season. My big curiosity with him is, can he be comfortable just playing a role? And I think part of why he was effective and successful in that first half of the season is because of the guys out. He knew he was going to get his touches. He knew he was going to get his reps. And now when it becomes more selective again, maybe more similar to his rookie campaign, it's like, hey, we're going to try and create those corner threes. We're going to try and create those opportunities where you're running off those pin downs, and your expectation is just to shoot every time, and then just hang enough on the floor defensively to stay on the floor. I think the big thing for me is like, hey, can Grady look comfortable just in a role where maybe he's not getting 15 shots in a game, and he's maybe just getting somewhere between 6 to 8 or 6 to 10 on any given night.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it's like goes back to what we were saying of like at first, oh, you don't want them to be one-dimensional. You don't want them to, like why should we like narrow the focus? So to that, I will say, and you kind of touched on this already, I think there is a real differentiation between asking someone like Grady, right, who's like now coming into the sort of like, okay, what are the next 2 years of my career going to look like? How are they going to fit with this team? How do I want to develop and grow? Like zeroing in focus for an athlete, I think is a lot different than pigeonholing an athlete from the outside and saying like, this guy can only play this position, right? I think when the choice is like led by Grady and also to some degree the team because of what they want for him, it's not that there's limitation. It's that you're sort of like whittling away, finessing, what's already there, building on the foundation. So I think there is a differentiation, because I don't want to make hypocrites of us after we've just said like, stop just wanting guys to be only one thing. I think that is like the key difference. And it will be cool to see that from Grady, because like, frankly, we haven't really seen him in a place where like the pressure of like concentration and him needing to kind of really fall back to fundamentals. Like, we haven't seen what he would do in a situation like that yet. And if this is a team that wants to make a playoffs run as soon as this season, that's something that he's going to need to do. I wonder if they'll send him to Summer League again. I don't know. I could see it.
That's an interesting one. I feel like he may have graduated beyond
Perhaps.
that. I mean, because what was it last year? He played the first game and then he got hurt in the second one. And
yeah,
it was just done. But
yeah, that's true. They might want to be careful. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess maybe if it's something that he wants to do, and I could see him being the type where he's like, his ego isn't in a place where he'd be like, no, this is below me, beneath me.
Yeah.
So if it's maybe something that he wanted to do, I could see that. But yeah, maybe some of that will come down to who gets selected ninth.
True.
I think that's a good place to leave off. Katie, let the people know where they can find your work.
Yeah, you can find me at Basketball Feelings, where we are in the middle of Exits, the series I do now in its 5th year, which is crazy. But with guest writers, some of those are media, some of those are authors, sometimes they're musicians, comedians, whatever. But they'll pick a team that is important to them, and we write about them. They write about them. I write about them as the team is eliminated from the playoffs. So it's kind of like a slower retrospective look back at the season, less of like a what's went wrong, what's like gone wrong for that team, than a look at their season as a whole and like looking forward. You can find that at basketballfeelings.com.
And if you know anything about Katie, you know that it is all must read content. So head on over there and check it out. Head on over to our Locked On Raptors Discord, where you can discuss what we've been talking about today. Thank you for making Locked On Raptors your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft, a 5-episode series with the most comprehensive NBA draft analysis from NBA experts to college experts and NBA draft experts. Find the 2025 Locked On NBA Mock Draft on NBA Big Board and Locked On NBA on YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts.